كانوا قليلا من الليل ما يهجعون وبالأسحار هم يستغفرون.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have now taken in some great detail the rules for reading lam, whether it's the lam of ta'rif, right, idgham or idhar, or it's the lam of fi'l, right? So he says li lami halani qabla ahrufi. We took that, mashallah. واللام الأولى سميها قمرية واللام الأخرى سميها شمسية. And then we took the second part, what وأظهرن لام فعل مطلقة في نحو قل نعم وقلنا والتقى, right? The lam of fi'l, the lam of fi'l. How do you read a lam that has sukun if it's in the middle of a verb? Then we talked about at the end of the verb some of the exceptions, and that is that after that verb, if we find a ra or lam, alam aqul lak qur rabbi zidni ilma. Now we're going to talk about the lam of nouns. And what that means is if the letter lam appears in the middle of a noun with sukun. For example, sultan, 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 sultan. Sultan is a great example. Salsabila in Surah Al-Insan, verse number 18. Salsabila, and the word sultan in Surah Al-Rahman, verse 33. The rule for lam with sukun that appears in the middle of a noun is wujub idhar. Wujub idhari, that you have to make it idhar. The second is called lam al-amr, and I teach this. It's one of the signs of jazm. It makes the mudari' have sukun, or it causes the noon and the mudari' to be mahdhufa, or one of the huruf al-illa. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But if you do, mashallah, you're following in the foundations of Arabic class, this is going to make a little bit more sense to you maybe. But there is what's called lam al-amr, which when it's placed in the middle of a fi'l mudari', it implies that the action associated with that verb is an obligation. For example, the hadith from Sayyidina Abi Hurayrata radiyallahu anhu, from the Prophet ﷺ, who said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir, falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut." Who believes in Allah and the last day, fal. He didn't say fayaqul. He said fal. You hear that lam in there? Falyaqul. Falyaqul. That's called lam al-amr. It always has sukun. In Surah Nisa, verse number 102, wal ta'ti ta'ifatun. Wal ta'ti. Wal ta'ti. You can also find it in Surah Al-Hajj, ثُمَّ الْيَقْطَعْ. ثُمَّ الْيَقْطَعْ. It's called lam al-amr. What is the ruling for reading that lam which has sukun in fi'l mudari' is wujub idharu. Wujub idharihi. You have to make it clear. You have to read The last part of this section is going to deal with two words which are considered articles. Hal is when I ask you a question. Hal anta Ahmed? Hal anta jitta min al-masjid? Did you come? Hal ataka hadithul ghashiya? Hal ataka hadithul ghashiya? Hal is like istifham, harf al-istifham. Did this happen? The second word, which is also a harf, is an article, is bel. Al-inkara wa zajar. Bel. بران على قلوبهم بران على قلوبهم. In Surah Al-Mutaffifin, verse 14. These two harfs have special rules that are very similar to the lam of fi'l because they end with sukun. Bel, hal, lam sakina at the end of them. Let's start with hal first. And the first rule is that you have to make idhar of the lam. And when does that happen? MashaAllah, إذا جاء بعدها حرف من الحروف الهجائية ما عدا اللام نحو هل تربصون. If I find the word hel and after it comes any letter from حروف الهجائية, from the Arabic letters, except lam, I have to make idhar. Hal tarabbasun. Surah At-Tawbah, verse 52. 9th chapter, verse 52. Hal tarabbasun. Hal tarabbasun. هل تربصون هل أتاك حديث الغاشية سورة الغاشية هل أتى على الإنسان هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا هل أتاك حديث موسى. So here we see hel after ista or hamza, and we hear that the lam of hel, right, this article is mudahhar. It's clear. The hukam here is that after hel, there's any letter other than lam, wajib idhari. You have to make the lam idhar. The only time you're going to make idgham, and it's an obligation to make idgham, is after the word hel, there is another word that starts with a lam. So for example, hel lakum. Hel lakum, Surah Al-Rum, verse 28. Hal lakum, the 30th chapter of the Qur'an, verse 28. Hal lakum. It's hel lakum. The first word, hel, ends with lam, with sukun. The second word, lakum, starts with a lam which has fatha. You're going to make idgham of the first lam into the second. Hal lakum. Hal lakum. It is an obligation to make idgham there. Alhamdulillah. The second word that we want to take is bel. And there are also two rules for bel that we want to talk about. Okay? The first, wujub al-idgham. إذ جاء بعدها لام مثلها للتماثل نحو بل لا يخافون. بل لا يخافون. So just like hell, if after bel comes a word that starts with lam, you're going to make idgham of the last letter in bel with the first letter of the word after. So بل لا يخافون. بل لا يخافون, Surah Al-Muddathir. And here it's idgham. The second, and this is a little different than hell, is if after bel is ra. And I need you to pay attention to this. So for example, in Surah An-Nisa, verse 157, بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ. No, Allah raised Isa. But you don't say بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ, you say بَلْ رَفَعَ اللَّهُ بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ. You make idgham of the lam into the ra. So if after bel is lam or ra, you're going to make idgham. Why ra? Because ra is mutaqarib, it's close. Look, al-ar, al-ar, mutaqariban. They have the same almost makhraj, even though they differ in the sifa, in the shape. Barrana. But there is one exception. And it's not really an exception, but if you read with the narration of Hafs, depending on the tariq of Hafs, and if you're reading with the tariq of Sayyidina Ash-Shatibi, you have to make what's called sakt. In Surah Al-Mutaffifin, verse 14, you say, Bel rana, bel rana. You have to stop for a minute. Bel rana ala qulubihim. Sakt means that you stop without taking a breath. Sayyidina Ash-Shatibi says, وَسَكْتُهُمُ الْمُخْتَارُ دُونَ تَنَفُّسٍ وَبَعْدُهُمْ فِي الْأَرْبَعِ الزُّهْرِ بَسْمَلَةٍ. Yani that you have to make sakt, and sakt means bila tanaffus, that you don't go bel rana without a breath. Bel rana ala qulubihim. Here you hear the lam, it's not idgham because you stopped. But depending on who you read with in the narration that they're teaching you, even of Hafs, you may go barrana, barrana, barrana without stopping. Without stopping. So the first two rules of bel is if after the word bel comes lam or ra, you're going to make idgham. The only exception to this depends on how you're reading the 14th verse of Surah Al-Mutataffifin. Bel rana ala qulubihim ma kanu yaksibun. The last rule for bel is idhar. It's easy. If after bel comes any letter other than ra or lam, you're going to make idhar of the lam. Bel. So for example, bel ta. Ta after lam. Ta is not ra. Ta is not lam. So now you're making idhar of the lam of bel. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Bel taba Allahu alayha bi kufrihim. Allah sealed their hearts because of their kufr. But the point is, bel ta. bel, ta. So mashallah, as you can see, there's some things that weren't mentioned in the poem that I felt we have to teach you now, mashallah. And that is that after lam halani qabla harufi and after wa adhiranna lamma fi'la mutlaqa, then we have to start to talk about some of the exceptions to idhara lam al-fi'l, right? That after lam al-fi'l comes a ra or a lam, special rule. Number 2, we talked about lam al-ism, sultan, da'iman idharuhu, always you have to make idhar. And then we talked about lam al-amr, falyaqul khayran, always idhar. And then we talked about the lam of harf, and we said there's only 2 words, hal and bel. Hal, 2 situations. If any letter other than lam comes after it, you make idhar of hal. If lam comes after it, then you make idgham hal lakum, hal lakum, hal lakum, as we mentioned before in Surah Al-Rum, verse 28. Then we talked about bel. We said there are 3 rules for that, right? Number 1 is idgham idgham, if after bel is a lam or bel is a ra. And then the 3rd is idhar, if any letter other than lam or ra comes after bel, you are going to read it with the idhar of the lam. Bel taba Allahu alayha bi kufrihim wa la yu'minuna illa qalila. In Surah Nisa. Alhamdulillah, now I feel that comfortable that I've given you sufficient information about this important topic. There is more. Of course, this is an introduction. And always, if you have questions, you can reach out to me. You can contact me and help me also grow and improve. But the next chapter, oh my gosh, it's very, very important, especially if you want to continue to proceed in your study of tajweed. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakum Allahu khairan wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
كانوا قليلا من الليل ما يهجعون وبالأسحار هم يستغفرون